really an attempt to pull all that together and to reach a point where we're able to ask a recommendation to City Council. So the first portion of this meeting will be a recap by Brent Cagle and Haley Gentry of what conversations have taken place so far and what accommodations we are able to make or are considering making. And so for the purposes of that, I will hand over to Brent Cagle.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Driggs. So over the last 3 to 4 weeks, as COVID-19 has started, we have been working with concessionaires and the airlines, really all of our stakeholders, to look at how we all deal with this. And as we said early on in this, our goal here is to figure out how we all survive the crisis, move through the crisis, and are ready to come back to full operational strength as the recovery starts. So with that in mind, we have been looking at the host and the Parodies contracts. They are different contracts and they are not the same. However, they are similar. And so early on, the first thing that we did is we deferred April, May, and June rents for both host and Parodies, and we really did that so that we could assess the effects and really what rent was due, because we knew that starting in March, middle of March, both of the contracts have rent relief provisions, and starting in March, we knew that those rent relief provisions would be triggered. So we wanted to, number one, help the concessionaires, but number two, determine how much, if any, rent was actually due for the last quarter of the current fiscal year 2020. And we are working through that. We still don't have an answer, but we're confident that those rent relief provisions will remain in place through the quarter because of the steep decline in passenger traffic. And both of the rent relief provisions are predicated on loss of passenger traffic. So if passenger traffic declines to less than 65% of prior year, both contracts have rent relief provisions that kick in. And obviously we are far below 65% of prior year, because we have seen declines of 90 to 95%. So both of those provisions have kicked in. Now, as we did that, we also acknowledged that next fiscal year is going to be a tough year. And that's because whether or not we use our base case projection or the worst case or something in between, we are still going to see significant passenger declines through 2021. Now we're cautiously optimistic that those declines, that the recovery will start to help us get back to a new normal, but still there's going to be a period where we are trying to recover. So with that, we looked at a few things. So let me start with some of the items that are expenses for the airport that we have worked through and that the team has really spent hours trying to figure out how we can cover expenses of the airport that will then accrue a benefit to all of the tenants, the airlines and the concessionaires. So I'm going to focus on some of the items that are specific to concessionaires, but again, these are not just, there are also other things that the airlines will benefit from too. The first is before COVID-19, we were working with the Charlotte Area Transit System, or CATS, to introduce a new program that if you are an airport employee, not an employee of the aviation department, but an employee who works at the airport and is enrolled in the employee parking program. So American Airlines, the concessionaires, everyone has employees who are in the employee parking program. There are about 12,000, or there were pre-COVID-19, 12,000 employees in the program. So what we are doing is, and what we are working on is making part of the program an annual transit pass available to all of those employees who are in the program. Now, that would be at no cost to the employee. In normal times, that would result in an increase in the employee parking program costs that then would be borne by the tenants, by American Airlines, by the concessionaires. But with the provision from the federal government of CARES Act funding, what we are recommending, or what we're looking at doing, is utilizing CARES Act or stimulus funds to pay for that, so that that cost is not borne by the concessionaires or by American Airlines, and the benefit accrues to their employees so that they have an annual, in effect, free transit pass for the year as part of the employee parking program. The second thing that we've looked at are some of the pass-through costs that the airport, these are services that the airport pays for, and then the cost of those services are passed through to the tenants. So what are those? Some good examples: pest control in the building, trash service in the building. Those are contracts that the airport holds, so we pay the contract, and then we pass those costs on a pro rata basis onto the tenants. So those account for, in the case of host imparities, about $900,000 of annual costs. Again, because the airport directly pays for those services, we can apply and will apply stimulus funds to those costs. And so that takes those costs off of the cost of operations because they're no longer a pass-through. So another area, in the contract with the concessionaires are responsible for furnishings in the common, in the food courts, so to speak, so in the atrium. Those furnishings, when they get refreshed, that is part of the contracted responsibility of the concessionaires, primarily Host. So we have already discussed with Host that we will take on the cost. It's actually time for us to update furnishings in the atrium, in the food court. And so we will take that on as a cost of the airport. I do not have a cost estimate on that, but it is certainly in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And again, that is something that we will utilize stimulus funds to pay for as an airport cost. Taking it off of the backs of the concessionaires, so to speak, during this crisis. The other thing that we're looking at is how can we assist the concessionaires with marketing. And this is true for airlines, concessionaires, for the airport. We really are starting to think about a marketing campaign to reinstill customer confidence in the safety of travel. So that is something that the airport will take on as a responsibility of the airport, working with the tenants to create a marketing campaign, and we will pay for that, again, utilizing stimulus funds. A few other things that we are still evaluating are a request from concessionaires. Because they have a profit-sharing arrangement, they have requested flexibility with how the profit-sharing, the annual settlement goes for FY20. And so without getting into the weeds of that, we are open to that, and we want to be flexible in how we settle up the fiscal year 20 year-end profit-sharing. Another thing, and this is pertinent especially to the ACDBE providers or smaller providers, is the contract requires an annual certified audit, or an annual audit by a certified accountant. The request has been to allow the corporate CFO or CEO to conduct that audit internally and certify it under their signature so that they don't have to bear the expense of that, of hiring a dedicated audit firm or accounting firm. Again, we're okay with that. We are working through how to accommodate that. But again, that's something that we're looking at, and we really are, we think it's reasonable given the cash crunch that everybody is experiencing right now. A couple other things that we are still working through, that our legal team is working through and Haley's team is working through. In the host contract, there is a minimum annual guarantee. And without getting into the weeds of what that means, there is a minimum annual guarantee that would apply to fiscal year 20, and it's calculated based on fiscal year 19's revenues. Since fiscal year 20 is an odd year where we had 3 good quarters and 1 quarter of no revenues, there needs to be, for lack of a better term, there needs to be some sort of MAG adjustment or MAG relief in the current fiscal year. And so we are working with, and again, we think that's a reasonable request, but that is going to require a little bit more legal review, and likely will require that either through this task force or just directly from the aviation department, from myself, that we talk to Mr. Jones, the city manager, to authorize a temporary or one-time amendment to the contract. Again, I'm not overly concerned about that, but there are some things that have to be worked through on the legal side and on the approval side related to the minimum annual guarantee. But we think that's basically a reasonable request. The other couple things that have come out, without going into the entire list, I will say last week we got a request from Host that had several items on it for us to consider. The MAG relief was one of those things. There are also rent deferrals, a request for rent deferrals in the first half of next fiscal year, so that would be July through December, with a repayment period starting in January. Again, we are looking at that, and we think that it's a reasonable request, and so we are working through the legal issues and just trying to figure out what is required of the contract to accommodate that request. There was one element in the Host request that we do, that does give us pause and that we're not prepared to accept. And that would be a waiver of all rents for the first 6 months of fiscal year 21. So again, July through December. And that would include a waiver of percent rents. So when you think about rents, there's a fixed space rent, and then there's a percent of sales rent that's required of business owners, of tenants in the airport. And our position on the percentage rents is that if the shop is closed, there's no percent rent due. So many of the shops right now are closed and they're not making sales. So there is no percent rent due because, you know, a percentage of 0 is 0. But once those shops reopen and start to have sales, we believe it's reasonable to say that percent rent always applies to sales. If sales are being made, then the percent rent applies to that. Where we're looking at is on the minimum annual guarantees and the fixed rents, and providing either deferrals or via the Parodies contract. The Parodies contract actually has a waiver of fixed rents while we're reduced by 65% or more, or while we have a reduction of 65% or greater. So again, we're working that out, and we're trying to be as consistent as we can, and we're trying to be as equitable and fair as we can, and we're also looking at what the impact is as we defer or as we make decisions about concession rents that then has a ripple effect on airport revenues, which then ripples into airline cost per employment. as Mr. Minerva stated last week, every dollar of non-airline revenues that we do not collect results in an additional cost, in effect, on the airline side, because it's a closed system, so to speak. If you push the balloon on one side, it pops out on the other. And so our solution for that as we work through this is, as the group knows, there is $135 million of stimulus funds that the federal government made available to us. And under those requirements, we have to use those funds to pay airport or aviation department expenses. So as revenues decline, we have made cuts to our operating budget, but that still yields a CPE, or cost per enplaned passenger, that's a little higher than where we normally like to be, because we like to be the cost leader. So the solution to that is to apply a significant amount of stimulus funds to the cost of our operations and maintenance budget for fiscal year 21. That will then reduce the cost per enplaned passenger, because as we take those costs and pay them with stimulus funds, those costs are no longer passed on to the tenants, mainly the airlines in this instance. And so we're trying to balance on the concession side the revenue stream and the waivers or deferrals, and how that reduces the revenue stream, with the cost side and how that impacts the cost per enplaned passenger. So like I said, I think that we are in a very good position. I think that we have a plan both for how we utilize stimulus funds against our cost of operations, and we have a good solid plan for how we continue moving forward to provide relief to the concessionaires. That relief is not the same for both concessionaires, but what I would say is it's similar, and it provides us and them the ability to preserve cash and get through this crisis so that we come out on the other side to recovery. Now, I will say there is a lot of concern about what if the recovery is weaker than we anticipate. What if it's not that base case scenario that I presented in the first meeting? Well, what I would say to that is why it's important for us to make wise decisions about the use of the stimulus funds, because we may need it to help reduce that cost per enplaned passenger over a longer period of time. And I would say we also acknowledge that come October, November, December, as we start to see what the recovery looks like, is it that base case, or is it that worst case, or is it somewhere in between? We readily acknowledge that we may need to sit down with the concessionaires and talk about other options that would be reflective of a different recovery scenario than what we're utilizing right now. Because if the worst case scenario is more what the recovery looks like, we know that come January, remember in the worst case scenario, that is a recovery to 50% of prior year. Well, that's going to have implications for all of us on the business side. And it's impossible for us to think about, it's been very difficult for us because of the dynamic nature and the fast-moving nature of this crisis to really have that crystal ball. If that's where we are in November, we know that there are going to be further discussions, because the business is going to be fundamentally changed in that the recovery is much weaker than we thought. I would say, just as a point of reference, a recovery to 50% of traffic levels are traffic levels that we haven't seen in over a decade in Charlotte. So that's going to fundamentally change our approach, but we don't know that that's the recovery. We just don't know right now. I will say, on the upside, we are seeing the recovery already starting in Charlotte. Clearly, we are very, very diminished in passenger traffic, but we are seeing week over week increases, steady increases in both the number of passengers and the number of flights going out or coming through Charlotte. And so we're encouraged by that, but we still don't really know what the recovery looks like as we get into the summer and the fall and the winter.
Is that it, Brent?
Yes, sir.
And did Haley have anything she was going to add, or did you just summarize the airport's position?
I think Brent covered
The
it.
airport's position. Okay, I see Larkin Eggleston has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Driggs. Just wanted to have Brent speak a little more to, I understand the consideration of giving relief to our vendors there at the airport. I'm not sure who all received it, but I think most all of us did. Some emails from employees of those companies in the last 24 hours and their concerns around the loss of health insurance potentially on May 31st for them and their family members. And oftentimes we're talking about low-wage workers here who wouldn't have the means to necessarily get a COBRA plan to carry them over. Obviously, we don't necessarily know what the timeline will be for bringing back all of those workers. I guess a couple of questions. Were either of those major vendors there or major employers there eligible for a PPP? Did they utilize that? Have they been able to bring back employees? And if we were to offer relief, are we able to tie that relief to any sort of stipulation like extending the health insurance coverage of furloughed employees?
So let me start with your second question first, because I think I will defer your first question to Host Parodies and their ACDBE providers who are present on the call. The second question is, can we tie relief to stipulations associated with benefits or employment of their employees? And I think the simplest answer is, and I've unfortunately said this before, under North Carolina law, we are not. It is not legal for us to dictate or mandate employment practices to a tenant or a private company that utilizes the airport. And so the simple answer on that is these measures that I'm talking about, no, we do not believe it would be legal under North Carolina law to add stipulations related to their hiring or their staffing levels or even the benefits that they extend to their staffing. To your first question, are the companies and tenants eligible for other federal programs? I believe the answer is yes and no, it depends. But I think I would rather possibly defer that to the companies themselves.
Mr. Douglas, do you have a comment?
Yes. Again, I'm not the expert on this, but as I understand it, Host has not received any PPP funding. Each of our small business partners had the opportunity to apply for those programs based on their eligibility. I do not have a list of who applied and who received it. I know that some of the companies across the country who have applied were not able to get it. But I'll need to either go back and talk to each partner about what they did or didn't apply for and get. I just don't happen to have that handy at the moment.
Mr. Driggs, do you mind if I follow up?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Douglas or whoever else would be appropriate to answer the question, I presume that you heard the same concerns, potentially from the same employees, but I imagine that concerns are pretty universal. Have those been discussions that you've been able to have directly with either the employee unions or employees individually And is there any plan in place for how you might deal with that, or is it just something that you view as an unfortunate inevitability?
First and foremost, taking care of our associates is top of the list. It's a big investment, getting the right people to the airport, getting them trained, and we don't want to lose them. And so, we have not, again, I'm no expert. This is not my area of expertise. And the terminology I may not say exactly right, but we did furlough people so that we could bring them back faster when the time is right. And that we are looking at ways to provide benefits for the longest period that we can, and try to do it in a smart manner so that we survive this crisis as well. So I know that there's constant ongoing discussions about how do we do that? Where are we? How is the recovery coming? When can we get people back? And how can we continue on providing as much benefit as we can? Because we without our employees, we don't exist. I mean, so we're doing a lot. And again, it's just not my role in the company in those discussions, but I know that it's at the highest levels and in the forefront of people's minds.
Ongoing up.
So, Larkin, I just want to say I've had a number of conversations with the parties about this and tried to decide what role there might be for our working group here, and recognizing that this is in fact a national negotiation between a union and an employer, and there's all kinds of stuff that kind of springs from that. The city is not funding health insurance from its resources in any of the things that we're doing right now. So our ability to come in and use resources we have to fix it is questionable. It would then invite all kinds of other applications beyond our means. And otherwise, I'm just worried about where we end up if we try to involve ourselves in the conversation of the local airport employees with their local employer, given that the terms of their employment are defined by a national labor agreement. So I really don't want this group to get into that and try to solve it, because when you study it further, you find that resources have been set aside to allow those employers, for example, to continue to offer health coverage up to a point, and the resources that had been agreed on and joint, and the resources that had been agreed on and set aside for that purpose run out at that point. It's just a lot around this. I think council may want to consider it, but again, I'm not sure this working group is going to be able to solve that. It's Matt Newton as well. So Larkin, if
yeah, and I certainly understand and appreciate those.
If you're okay for the moment, I'd like to let Matt speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was approached by a representative of United here and suggested that if they could send to us a kind of description of their issue that we could circulate to our members for discussion today, that I would make that available to everybody. I didn't, in fact, receive that. So the only knowledge we have right now is I have an email from Stuart Mora, and I haven't heard from the union. So at this stage, I would really prefer that we not try to tackle this. We've got a limited amount of time to achieve a purpose that I will describe in greater detail in just a moment. But I did want to also hear from Matt Newton. Thank you, Larkin. Matt?
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just echo the concern of my colleague, Mr. Eggleston. I feel like, we're in a health crisis right now, and we need to make sure that folks have health insurance if and when they need to use it. And it does concern me that employees will lose it around May 31st. So I hope we continue this dialogue and we find creative innovative solutions to the problem. Having said that, wanted to ask a question of Mr. Cagle regarding the airport stimulus funds. I know that we have limitations on the funds that have been provided to the city, and we have a period whereby we have to appropriate those funds or we lose them. We give them back to the federal government. Does that apply to the airport stimulus funds? And if so, what is that date, that deadline in which they must be appropriated?
So it is unclear from the FAA. What I would say is this question has come up not directly or specific to Charlotte, but what I believe the FAA is talking about is 4 years. Now, the reality is the funding that CLT, the airport, received will not last 4 years. We are looking at utilizing 100% of the funding over the next 12 months or sooner. And so what the FAA has said is they would not support an airport, in effect, sitting on the funds for an inordinate amount of time. The point of the funds is to help us get through this crisis and to be put to use immediately. So we are looking at the funding assisting or 100% of the funding being utilized over I said 12 months, over fiscal year 21, so over about the next 14 months.
Thank you.
Ms. Watlington.
Sure. I just wanted to.
Ms. Watlington.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
We
ma'am.
can hear you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
You're on.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add a +1 to what Council Members Eggleston and Newton have said. I realize, to your point, Mr. Chair, that this may not be the forum to do so, but do want to make sure that it's clear that there's energy here to do that at council, or at least investigate it. So I'd be interested to find out what the outcomes of some of those discussions are at a later date. That's all.
Thank you. I've noted that, and I know that there is a level of interest. We've seen in the past that the city took some interest in the terms of employment of employees, of subcontractors. So we all share the concern for those employees who are going to lose their insurance. I just know from my own investigation of this subject, since it was brought to my attention, that it has many facets. And what I want to try to accomplish in today's meeting, and to move on actually to the next point, is the city received $155 million from the federal government. And the manager on Monday told us that 70 million of that could be made available for relief. So that was designated for small businesses and housing. I've had a conversation with the manager saying, we may need some money in order to make recommendations as a result of this process that we're engaged in right now. And I think what we're going to try to do in this meeting is identify specific needs or specific asks that we can include into council's discussion of the disposition of the $70 million that the city has. I think the director, Brent, has explained pretty clearly, the terms for the aviation money and for the city's money are not the same. So it doesn't necessarily follow that because the manager has identified an opportunity for us to use the city money in the way that he proposes, that there must be an equivalent opportunity on the aviation side. And but what would be really helpful today is for us perhaps to hear from the subconcessionaires, and in this conversation to come away with a couple of items that we can kind of put numbers to that would afford relief. We're not going to be able to offer it a make-whole, a blanket make-whole, obviously, but are there actions we can take or now specific money requests we can make that can be included in the greater council conversation about the 70 million and would be very helpful to airport concessionaires. And that's why I'm hoping that they will speak up As you know, the reason we spent so much time in the first three meetings going over groundwork was because this environment is very complicated. What you can and can't do, the federal regulations, the contractual relationships. We've tried to lay all that out. I hope I lay all that. You all got the memo that Brent wrote. You all got the memo that Brent wrote, which is a good reference in case you have any questions about what we've heard so far. Just say, give me some ideas. Let's have some ideas on things that if we had money from the city, for example, we could use it for. I think some of the sub-concessionaires can benefit from what is already being discussed for small businesses, for local small businesses. But the truth is that the recovery outlook for airport concessions is a different path from small businesses in the city. So our particular focus is just what might be the special needs of those businesses compared to whatever general decisions are being made about small businesses in the city. And I would invite, again, we have, I think, 5 or 6 of the sub-concessionaires on the call, and of course a couple members of our group. And so I would like to invite you to kind of make any suggestions you have for things that would make it easier for you or that would help you to get through all of this. But, by the way, Matt, I see your hand is still up. Is that you to get through all of this? By the way, Matt, I see your hand is still up. Is that just because you didn't take it down? Matt? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Anybody, now's your chance. All right, if we don't have the specific input.
I'm sorry.
Hang on. Yolanda, I didn't see your hand. You're at the bottom of the list. Go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead. Thank you. Yolanda?
Hi, Ed. This is Rachel Gethers. I'm sorry.
Oh. Okay. I see Yolanda has her hand up. Are you
Okay,
there?
I can wait for Yolanda.
Yeah, I'll get back to you, Rachel. Go ahead, Yolanda.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I know I've said this before in one of our previous meetings, but first I want to thank Brent and his team for what he presented today. His thoughts showed a lot of work behind the scene. As he's mentioned several times, he's dealing with 2 prime contracts that don't operate under the same mechanics. And so to make sure that those contracts are fair and equitable requires a lot of work, and I appreciate that. And without getting into the weeds of it all, just like Brent said, I trust that Brent and team will make sure that as all of the local business owners are equally struggling, that we receive equally the concessions that are available under those leases. Brent hit it on the head. I mean, he mentioned some other things, or the director mentioned some other things related to parking and pass-through costs, and all of that helps. But at the end of the day, I think the thing that all ACDBEs think about, in addition to the rent that we pay, he mentioned the percentage rent under the host agreement. That's something that's $1 or 15% out of what we're making that is very minimal, that could definitely be used to help us survive, recover, and rebuild. So throwing that out there, that's the obvious. And then secondly, any resources that can be provided to us to assist with PPE and social distancing protocol. I know that we have all local business owners have tried to share resources related to that, because we're in the process now of making sure we have masks and gloves and the sanitizer that we need to have available, as well as signage that we need to have, as well as the sneeze guards or shields. Those are all things that we're still obligated to provide for our teams while we're still trying to keep things running and pay those costs that sound minimal. But again, they're not that minimal when you're only receiving 5% of the revenue that you projected. So again, thanks to our director and team, and those are my thoughts.
So that's helpful, and I think what I can do is talk to the director about what those needs might be. That sounds like something that could be within the scope of what the city is contemplating doing, PPE type of things. One thing I wanted to offer as a suggestion too is that if there is any lack of clarity in the minds of subconcessionaires about exactly what might be available to them, or whether or not they're getting the benefit of all the resources the federal government is making, we could have a working group study this and make sure that good information goes out to all of the subconcessionaires about what their opportunities are and facilitate their access to relief that's available from the federal government directly. So, Mr. Cagle, I think if we look at things like signage and PPE and so on, we might be able to build an ask around that. Would you agree?
Yes, sir. I would say there are some, one concern about the PPE specifically is, and I hate to say it this way, but legal liability. Well, there's two concerns around PPE. One is the supply chain pressure. We're struggling to get PPE ourselves for the 600 aviation employees. The other becomes a legal liability issue, and we would need to work through that. When it comes to signage and sneeze guards and those kinds of things, yes, our experienced recovery team, we've already assembled a group to start looking at this. And whether it be social distancing stickers, whether it be messaging in the terminal, sneeze guards at concessionaires, we want to work with host and parodies and the airlines, with all of the tenants, to figure out how we meet passenger expectations, and if it means that we utilize some funding to pay for some of those things, I think that's completely acceptable.
And we will also, I'm going to talk to the working group leader, James Mitchell, for small businesses and find out which things they're looking at doing could benefit local subconcessionaires, because I think they are definitely among the community of people we intend to assist, and so they certainly shouldn't be left out of any more general things that we're doing. But I guess those are the keys, and therefore what I would propose is that Mr. Cagle and I work on a kind of summary report identifying some of the issues that have come up, and therefore participate in the conversation with the manager and full council about how the $70 million is allocated, whether we can set aside some of that for a couple of the issues that have been brought up in these conversations. And then my intention would be to circulate that to the members of the task force and agreement on it, perhaps next week's meeting, or even if through an exchange of emails, so that we can get involved in the conversation about the use of city funds quickly, because I gather that the other working groups are already making spending plans. So that's really, I think, kind of it for now, unless anybody has any further comments or input. Brent, anything else from you?
Rachel wanted to speak. I think Rachel, Ms. Gaithers, I believe, had a comment.
Oh, Rachel, are you still waiting? I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
It's okay. Thank you so much, Brent, and thank you, Councilman Driggs. I appreciate the opportunity to address the group here. Yolanda stole most of my thunder, as she commonly does, because she is so brilliant, and I appreciate her comments. I think the only thing I would build onto what she mentioned is And Ed, honestly, thank you for highlighting the 70 million that this city has, that has a fewer restrictions from those dollars that Brent and the airport received through the FAA. I think a next step for me, or a question that I would have, that I would raise for our task force to better understand is, what types of things beyond PPE and beyond PPE, what other things can the 70 million be used for? Are there other things that you're doing for street side businesses in terms of ensuring their stability during this time that can be applied to airport operators, local airport operators? Because to your very point, Councilman Driggs, we don't have the opportunity to pivot. We don't have the opportunity to market or sell our goods and services to the non-traveling public. We are landlocked, if you will. So I look forward to better understanding more about that 70 million and any parameters that would be a part of it, and finding creative ways to help local business owners at the airport survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaithers. You also mentioned to me that there are, in fact, other members, other stakeholders in the greater airport community. We have included the big blocks, if you will, of parties to agreements. But I will also talk with the director a little more about some of the others you suggested we consider and see how they fit. But mainly what I want to do and what I'm going to propose is that I get together with the manager and the mayor and the other working group heads to, for one, identify what they're proposing, which of those things could be beneficial to airport stakeholders, and then make sure that we have the ability to access some of that money for the benefit of the airport. And I think what Mr. Cagle is doing reflects a big effort on his part to bend everything in such a way as to benefit the entire community, and I appreciate that from him. And I don't want people to get the impression that somehow the city is being more liberal with its money than the airport is. It really is a different situation. So with that,
Driggs?
the next thing that will happen is we will get a draft of, wait a minute, the next thing that will happen is we will get a draft of, so with that, the next thing that will happen is we will get, wait a minute, I see some other hands up, I apologize. Let's get to Lucia.
Yes, thank you for all that presentation, and I've been witness of the great teamwork.
Can you hear me, Lucia?
Yep, I'm right here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say I've been witness to team efforts at Charlotte Douglas before. I can see that in a crisis like this. I know that we have focused a lot on local business owners and the concessionaires. I think it will be a good focus for us to expand that to the local suppliers and vendors, as 70 million, 30 million, whatever the amount is, that we kind of see ways to encourage local vendors, contractors, suppliers to benefit from that, as well as an expansion of what the airport does. And I also wanted to bring up, maybe for our future meetings, the airport owns more than just the terminals. There are a lot of other facilities that support freight forwarders, warehouses, and the like. I wonder if we can explore, or at least think about, how does this crisis affect the secondary layer of businesses, the ones that are not in the terminal, but are basically either served by or serving the operation of the airlines and transportation that happens at Charlotte Douglas. I know that the intermodal is a separate business, but all of them form this city within a city. Wonder if we can explore a little bit of that in our next meetings. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you for your comment. The one brief remark I would make is, my own view on this is, if we keep the economic motor of the airport running and get it running revved up, then a lot of benefits will kind of spread to the remainder of the airport community. But I certainly agree that we can consider, as we go to formulate our final recommendations, whether there's an accommodation as well for those. So thank you for your comment. Mr. Bennett.
Good morning, Councilman Driggs, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I would also add, similar to Ms. Johnson and Ms. Gether's comments in terms of what we can do to support the airport group with PPEs and such. I think Mr. Cagle, Mr. Gentry have done an excellent job in helping mitigate the circumstance. And I'm sure there's work to be done, but I think it would be lost if we don't start to put emphasis on a true path to recovery is going to be driven by the consumer's confidence in coming to the airport. And I think we're going to have to put our support around how we help the airport staff demonstrate that and how we message and communicate that. Because when customers start coming back, that's when the true recovery opportunity will kind of present itself. And I think it would be a mistake not to make sure that that is an emphasis for this committee.
Thank you for that. I know the public information is part of what the other groups have already talked about. And so we can certainly see what scope the airport has to do that, or whether that's an opportunity for the city to lend assistance as well, because you're right, people are going to be gun shy and they need to make their travel decisions based on an objective assessment of the current situation. So thank you for your comment. Ms. Johnson, your hand is up. Is it still up, or did you have something else you wanted to say?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
All right. And
Ms. White?
Ms. Griffin, likewise, I assume, Lucia, your hand is still up, and I assume that you're sure. Likewise, I assume, Lucia, your hand is still up, and I assume. Okay, well, we'll keep working, and I want to talk to my council colleagues as well offline, but we will get out to the whole working group with something for review in the course of the coming week. Thanks, everybody, for being on the call today.
Mr. Driggs.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Mr. Driggs.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. So there is a concessionaire that would like to say something, Patrice White. She's in as an attendee, so you can't see her. So Patrice White would like to say something.
Patrice, go ahead. Welcome to the call.
Thank you. Good morning. And again, I'm also a concessionaire, work for an ACDBE company. But another thing, when we were talking about how we could help concessionaires, our concession is not an essential concession, meaning it's not a restaurant. So has thought been given to possible reduced hours based on the banking of the flights for concessionaires that are not essential businesses like a restaurant?
That sounds like an airport question.
Yeah, so right now, the contracts do have requirements for maintaining service level, for keeping the stores open, the restaurants open, and maintaining a specific set hours. When this crisis started, we gave blanket authority to all subs and prime host parodies and all of their subs to make the decisions related to their operating hours and whether or not to maintain any hours at all, whether or not they wanted to close the stores based on their best judgment. And so we are not requiring, we're allowing concessionaires to make that decision. Now, as we move forward, we need to work with host parodies and the sub concessionaires to understand what the reopening plan is, so that, as Ms. Torres said and Ms. Gentry said in some of the earlier meetings, so that we ensure that the ACDBE providers are still maintaining hours and recovering at the same rate as the what I'm going to call the prime locations, so that we can continue to meet the ACDBE requirements. But at this point, that is an operator decision on hours and whether or not to operate at all.
Okay, thank you.
All right, do we have anybody else?
I believe that's all.
Okay, thank you. So, Brent, I think I heard expressions of appreciation for the great work you and your staff are doing. I'd like to echo that. And again, we'll get out with a draft memo and see you all next week. Thanks very much.